A growing backlash over the Commons Speaker's comments on President Trump. John Bercow told MPs that Donald Trump should not be allowed to address Parliament during his state visit on grounds of his racism and sexism. This morning he's faced calls from a growing number of Conservatives to consider his position. Also this lunchtime, trying to fix England's broken housing market, the government announces plans for 1 million new homes by 2020. A jailed Royal Marine goes to court to appeal his conviction for murdering an injured Afghan insurgent. A 10-minute appointment with your GP, how the UK has some of the shortest doctor's appointment times in Europe. And growing up online, how children as young as 10 are feeling the pressure to look good in selfies.
Sometimes people get more likes than you, and you may get a little bit jealous.
I take about 5 before I pick the one, and then I post it.
Here in the south, he escaped being killed by Anders Breivik, now victim of the Norwegian terror attack, speaks to students in Hampshire about the dangers of extremism. And a woman with advanced cancer pleads to be deported back home to Britain for treatment.
Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. A growing number of Conservative MPs have criticised the Speaker of the House of Commons, John Bercow, after he publicly opposed the idea of President Trump addressing Parliament during his state visit. He told the House of Commons yesterday that addressing MPs was not an automatic right, but an earned honour. It's prompted calls for him to consider his position, with some Conservatives accusing him of ignoring the tradition that the Speaker should stay neutral. But the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, said it was the duty of the Speaker to stand up for Parliament. Here's our political correspondent, Chris Mason.
My lords,
the ultimate accolade on a state visit.
ladies and gentlemen,
the red carpet and the chance to address both houses of Parliament. So this is where President Trump might have got to stand, and now he won't. It's the oldest part of Parliament, Westminster Hall, dates back to the 11th century. Critics say the Speaker's remarks went too far.
I don't think he wants to play politics, but clearly that's how it's being interpreted. I think he prides himself on being able to speak for the whole House and remaining neutral and impartial. And I think this statement that he made takes him away from that position and exposes him to the accusation of hypocrisy.
I invite you, Mr. President, to address us.
There were, after all, gushing words and the lingering outstretched hand of friendship for China's president 2 years ago. Despite criticisms of his country's human rights record, President Xi addressed Parliament's Royal Gallery. But the Speaker's view of President Trump...
Our opposition to racism and to sexism...
Good on you, Mr. Speaker, say some MPs. What you said was music to our ears.
I was in the hall at the time in the chamber. Absolutely brilliant. Absolute respect to him. He did a really fantastic job articulating the way the British people feel at the moment about, it's not about necessarily the President of the United States, let's be clear. It's about some of the misogynistic and some of the tones in which he's used in his campaign to become the President. And I've not seen him roll back from that yet. So John Bercow spoke on behalf of many of us in the House yesterday.
It's become rather traditional recently to keep a keen eye on President Trump's Twitter account. No response from him yet. Nonetheless, some of his allies have noticed.
That's very disappointing, because if ever in recent years been a more pro-British President of the United States, is Donald Trump.
My Lords, on behalf
and next up, this man, the Lord Speaker, Lord Fowler, will weigh in with his view. This row is not over yet. Chris Mason, BBC News at Westminster.
Well, let's speak to our assistant political editor, Norman Smith. How much trouble is the Speaker in, and could his decision be reversed, overturned?
Well, Sophie, you can almost see the steam coming out of the ears of Tory MPs who are incandescent with the Speaker. But does that mean Mr. Bercow's position is in jeopardy, or that the ban on Donald Trump is going to be overturned? I think not, because although Tory MPs take the view he has exceeded his position, he's adopted a partisan approach, he's shredded and undermined Theresa May's handy approach to diplomacy with President Trump. The fact is, none of them seem ready to take him on, in part because they fear if they do so, then they'll never be called to speak in the House of Commons again. But more importantly, if they put down a motion of no confidence in the Speaker, he might actually win it because he has the overwhelming backing of opposition MPs, which means Speaker Bercow stays in place, and if he stays in place, then the ban stays in place because he has a veto on who gets to address MPs in Westminster Hall. There is, though, one tiny little wrinkle, and it is the House of Lords down there. This afternoon we will hear from John Bercow's counterpart, the Speaker in the House of Lords, who will give his view, and it may be that he says, you know what, I'm pretty relaxed about Donald Trump speaking in the House of Lords. Question is, would Donald Trump really want to do that, knowing he could face a boycott by many MPs and peers, including the Speaker of the Commons?
Norman Smith in Westminster, thank you. Meanwhile, the latest round of Donald Trump's legal battle with the courts over his temporary travel ban continues today. A federal appeals court is due to decide whether to restore the president's 90-day ban on people from 7 mainly Muslim countries, a decision that's led to protests in America and elsewhere. From Washington, Richard Lister sent this report.
President Trump returned to the White House with the fate of one of his signature policies still unclear. He wants to temporarily close America's borders to all refugees and to travellers from 7 predominantly Muslim countries. But his order has been blocked by the courts. Earlier, he told members of the military that controlling access to America was the key to its security.
We need strong programs so that people that love us and want to love our country and will end up loving our country are allowed in. Not people that want to destroy us and destroy our country.
This appeals court's due to hear arguments for and against the ban before making its judgment. In motions filed by the two sides, the Department of Justice said the executive order is a lawful exercise of the president's authority to decide who can enter the country. But the states of Washington and Minnesota, which brought the case, argue the list of countries targeted by the order is intended to disfavour Muslims, which is a breach of the Constitution.
When we first created the Constitution, one of the things we said was there would be no religious tests for office. And this goes even further and erects a religious test for entry. And that just goes beyond what the Constitution allows.
This executive order was done in the best interest of protecting the American people. And I think this is something that has broad support from American people from one coast to another. And we're going to continue to do what we have to. And this president is committed to making sure that this country and its people are safe.
Around 130 tech companies are also opposing the ban, arguing that they need access to foreign talent. Among them are 2 companies owned by Elon Musk, SpaceX and Tesla. He's now chosen to resist the ban, despite being on the president's Business Advisory Council. For now, though, the people that President Trump wants to block are coming to America as fast as they can. All have been processed by immigration officers and have valid US visas. And it may finally be that the Supreme Court will have to rule on how much power Mr. Trump has to keep them out. Richard Lister, BBC News, Washington.
Well, President Trump has taken to Twitter again this morning, this time on the issue of Russia and Iran. He says he doesn't know President Putin. He has no deals in Russia, but the haters, as he calls them, are going crazy. Yet he goes on to say Obama can make a deal with Iran, #1 in terror, no problem. Well, let's speak to our correspondent in Washington, Kim Hattas. It's not going to do much to calm tension between the US and Iran.
No, indeed, Sophie. After 8 years under the Obama administration, when the US and Iran seemed to warm to each other, even reaching a nuclear deal, we're kind of back to a familiar pattern now, the one that dominated the preceding 3 decades between the US and Iran. And that war of words started last week, and it feels as though the Iranians and the Americans are testing each other. It started with the Iranians testing a ballistic missile to see how this new U.S. administration would react. The White House was quick to, as they said, put Iran on notice. They even slapped some sanctions on Iranian entities connected to the ballistic missile program. And now we also have a comment from the Iranian Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, in essence saying, we told you that the Americans were the bad guys. We told you that they couldn't be trusted. Donald Trump is the true face of the United States. The only danger here is that under the Obama administration, there was a good rapport between the U.S. Secretary of State and the Iranian Foreign Minister. They spoke often. Right now, those lines of communications aren't there, and that does mean that it could be harder to diffuse tensions.
Kim, thank you. England is being promised 1 million new homes by 2020 under plans being published by the government this lunchtime. It's setting out its strategy for fixing what it says is a broken housing market in England. The plans include building more affordable homes, help for first-time buyers and measures to make rental agreements more secure. Duncan Kennedy is in Southampton. Duncan.
Well, Sophie, you're right. The government has this morning called the British housing market broken, and it's not wrong. To give you an idea of the scale of the problem facing this country, take a look at this housing development behind me. It's building 350 homes. To meet the government's target of 1 million new homes in 4 years, you'd need around 3,000 developments like this right across the country. It's extremely ambitious, but this morning the government said it can be achieved. I should warn viewers, my report contains some flashing images.
Brown site or green belt? Just one of the grey areas in Britain's complicated house-building mix. But how to fix what the government today calls a broken housing market? Well, its white paper suggests the answers lie in getting the right homes built in the right places, meaning every council must come up with a long-term plan. Speeding up house building by giving councils new powers to put pressure on developers. And diversifying the market to get small independent builders back in and stop them being squeezed by the big players.
Prices are too high, we are not building enough homes, and this white paper is a radical blueprint to change this once and for all.
But the change required is massive.
The government's target in all this is 1 million new homes by 2020. That's 250,000 every year until then. The equivalent of 3,000 developments like this. It's hugely ambitious.
Take this development in Southampton, 350 homes on a brownfield site. Sounds ideal? It is, but the developer here says it's taken 2 years to get planning sorted and there simply aren't enough brownfield locations around.
Brownfield in itself can't possibly sustain the long-term housing requirements of the UK. It can go an awful long way, but there needs to be a relaxation of some green belt to enable us to deliver the numbers that we are required to do.
But the government today rejected almost all green belt building and says the housing solutions lie elsewhere. It's expanding rent-to-buy schemes and supporting more shared ownership. 4 years ago, Jennifer Tristram started with a 50% share of this Astor Homes flat in Bristol and has now increased it to 100%. But it's been a long struggle.
When I was looking, I remember there wasn't that much option out there for what I wanted and what I could afford. And I think like anybody who's in that same situation will probably be feeling that struggle more, probably even more so than I did when I was looking.
The government also thinks pre-made homes or modules could help, assembled in factories, transported by lorries and erected in half the time. It's a young industry, but is it really the solution?
Well, let me throw it back. I mean, over the last 20 years, the volume house builders and the housing associations haven't sorted the supply mess that we're in, so we're going to have to find new methods.
The government also says older people could downsize to free up their homes, but only if they're offered alternatives. Labour says the nation's housing policy remains in a mess.
And Labour also says that we haven't seen low building rates like we're currently having since the 1920s, although it also admits that it didn't get everything right when it was in power in the 1990s. There really is, Sophie, no quick fix for this, but reaching 1 million homes by 2020, that's a very tall order, and a lot will need to change in order to achieve it.
Duncan Kennedy in Southampton, thank you. The appeal has begun for a former Royal Marine who's in jail for murdering an injured Afghan insurgent. Sergeant Alexander Blackman was convicted in 2013 and sentenced to life. His conviction was referred to the Court of Appeal to establish whether he'd been suffering from combat stress at the time of the incident. Well, let's speak to our correspondent Daniel Bircher, who's at the Royal Courts of Justice. And this is what his lawyers are arguing, that he was mentally ill at the time.
Yes, Jonathan Goldberg QC, the barrister acting for Alexander Blackman, said it was the impact of fresh psychiatric evidence that was at the heart of the appeal. Now, this is the second appeal. The case was referred back to the courts by the Criminal Cases Review Commission, which is the body that looks into possible miscarriages of justice. During today's hearing, the court was shown graphic footage from a helmet camera showing a seriously wounded insurgent lying on the ground. He's then moved and shot in the chest, and this is the video that led to the initial trial. Now, Mr. Goldberg told the court that 3 experts had agreed that at the time he'd been suffering from a mental illness known as adjustment disorder, which had impaired his ability to form a rational judgment or exercise self-control. Alexander Blackman has not been in court himself. He's appeared here by video link, and this case in front of the judges is expected to last for 3 days.
Daniel, thank you. Tax rises and spending cuts are set to continue into the next decade, according to leading economists at the Institute for Fiscal Studies. The amount of national income raised through tax is now at its highest level in 30 years. Our economics correspondent Andy Verity is here, and after 7 years of austerity, what does this tell us?
Well, it tells us we're going to have another 7 more, unfortunately, Sophie. It's not how it's supposed to go in the Bible, is it? We've had since 2010 austerity, a 10% real terms cut in what we're spending on our public services. And the idea, of course, was that we sort out the public finances and then the economy starts to grow. Well, it doesn't really seem to have sorted out the public finances. We're still stuck with the highest national debt that we've had as a fraction of our overall income since before you and I were born, and we've also got a deficit which is going to be higher than in all but 13 of the last 60 years. So austerity hasn't really worked to sort out the public finances. Now, some people would say that's because we haven't had enough of it. In 2012, George Osborne decided, lighten up a little bit, we've got the euro crisis going on, we'll ease back on austerity. But there's a question of economic growth, and that's what underlies everything, Sophie, because if you don't have the growth, you don't have the tax money coming in, and your finances are going to get worse. And right now they're predicting that growth is going to be quite modest, just 1.3 or 1.6% in the next couple of years.
Andy, thank you. The time is coming up to 1:20, our top story this lunchtime. The Speaker of the House of Commons, John Bercow, is criticised by a growing number of Conservatives for his opposition to Donald Trump addressing MPs during his state visit. And still to come, a limit on prepayment energy bills. Meters will be capped to help low-income households.
In South today, escaped being killed by Anders Breivik, now a victim of the Norwegian terror attack, speaks to students in Hampshire about the dangers of extremism. And months after waking up to this, why residents here are now taking matters into their own hands.
Now, for most of us, a visit to our doctor is the main point of contact with the National Health Service. But for a long time, GPs have been warning about the pressures they're under, with patient safety and GP burnout some of their chief concerns. The average length of time a patient spends with their GP is around 10 minutes, one of the shortest in the developed world. And doctors are warning that the pressures in the rest of the NHS are just making the situation worse. In the latest in our week checking the health of the NHS, our correspondent Elaine Dunkley has spent the day at a GP's surgery in Liverpool.
OK, thank you.
The Great Homer Street Doctors' Surgery in Everton in Liverpool looks after more than 2,000 people. This is an area with high deprivation and patients with complex needs. Appointments are 13 minutes long.
30 minutes sometimes is enough and sometimes it isn't, and I think I do tend to adjust. So I would normally finish my surgery late anyway. And that's why we have recently increased to 30 minutes in the hope of reducing that, because on the whole, patients aren't too happy to wait. They're okay, they don't mind, they know they get the time they need. But it is, complicated problems can't be done in 30 minutes. Occasionally, consultations will last up to 40 minutes.
The average length of a GP consultation in the UK is 10 minutes, thought to be the shortest in the developed world. 92% of appointments here are less than 15 minutes, compared to 27% across Europe.
Stick your arm through there.
With people waiting longer to get appointments in the first place and plans to move care outside of hospitals, there are concerns that this could lead to an even bigger workload for GPs.
We spend less than other European countries. We have fewer doctors than other European nations. We have a 1/3 the number of hospital beds per head compared to Germany, for example. GPs spend less time per patient than any other European nation. We need to be addressing these issues as a priority.
With short appointment slots, time wasting is also an issue. An Ipsos Mori poll for the BBC found that 70% of people in the UK believed it was acceptable to charge patients who missed appointments. The governments of England, Scotland and Wales say the length of consultations are down to GPs, but have pledged extra funding to relieve time pressures. Northern Ireland have yet to respond, but GPs say funding can't come soon enough. Elaine Dunkley, BBC News.
Well, another problem facing the NHS is the shortage of GPs for rural areas. Recruiting and keeping doctors at smaller surgeries is becoming increasingly difficult, as our health correspondent Dominic Hughes reports now from Cumbria.
Nestled in the Eden Valley, the town of Appleby in Cumbria is as pretty a place as you could hope for. But life here isn't quite the picture postcard existence you might expect.
Really lovely town, really friendly, small but nice.
Dr. Ashley Liston is a recent arrival here, where the local surgery has struggled to recruit new doctors. Long days and the never-ending pressures of the job are leading many of his peers to think about giving up and getting out.
I'm 58, and many of my colleagues and contemporaries have either left or planning to leave. And in Cumbria, the statistics are that in the next 3 years, about 25% of GPs will either have retired or are planning to retire. So these are really worrying statistics. It's under pressure at the moment. It is likely to get a lot worse in the next few years. And as GPs leave, inevitably there's a knock-on effect on the remaining GPs. There's more pressure on them. So, I think things really are at a tipping point.
GP practices right across the UK do face immense pressures, mainly to do with the growing number of patients who need to be seen. But in rural areas like this, there is an additional problem, just trying to persuade doctors to come and work here in the first place.
We live on the edge of the Lake District. It's a beautiful place. We are always looking at moving the practice forward and looking at different ways of working. And we've always been recruiting or looking and having vacancies for GPs. So I don't know what we can do to attract them further.
All of this has an impact on patients who may struggle to get an appointment or see the doctor they want.
Hi, how are you today?
At the Appleby practice, they are trying new things. So receptionist Linda Osborne is now trained to take blood samples, relieving some of the time pressures faced by the medical staff.
Everyone else doing extra tasks means a doctor can concentrate on the more important things, the more urgent things.
And new ways of providing care may be at least part of the answer to the recruitment problems facing rural areas.
And I think a lot of the solutions are actually in our hands. I think the key thing that we need to do is just make general practice less dependent on GPs.
In towns across the UK, the role of the GP is evolving. That means a big change for the doctors, but also for us as patients too. Dominic Hughes, BBC News, Appleby.
Our health editor Hugh Pym is with me now, and the Health Secretary has just been on his feet in the House of Commons addressing all kinds of problems facing GPs, but making comments that they won't necessarily be happy with.
Well, that's right, Sophie. Jeremy Hunt, a short time ago, announced a couple of measures affecting GPs. One is following on from his health tourism initiative yesterday. He wants GPs to provide more information about overseas visitors. They refer to hospitals for treatment, so they can be charged if necessary. He also announced more details of what the Prime Minister flagged up a few weeks ago, which was that GPs in England who are offered extra money to provide extended access through the day and weekends and so on, who actually close for a few hours each day, will not qualify. This was identified by the National Audit Office, which said that actually there were certain numbers of surgeries that were just not open all day in working hours, never mind other times. Now that's been agreed with the British Medical Association and is all part of a move which the government wants to see more of to extend access. But GPs were pretty annoyed when the Prime Minister announced this the other week, saying they're already working a lot of hours. They're already providing extra access in the evenings and at weekends. They're worked off their feet. There are huge numbers of pressures. Their caseload's very high. Recruitment's very difficult. They often can't fill vacancies. We've been hearing about the problems just now. And actually, these sort of announcements today do nothing to really address the core problems facing general practice.
Hugh, thank you. Well, we will be looking at the state of health services in the UK all this week for the BBC's NHS Health Check, and you can follow the coverage online as well at bbc.co.uk/health. Householders who have prepayment meters are to have their energy prices capped. It's a change that could save them up to £80 a year. Around 4 million homes have the prepayment meters, and despite the fact that they're often households on low incomes, the charges they face are higher than other tariffs. Here's our business correspondent John Moylan.
For pensioner Maggie Leach, energy is a big part of her household budget. To avoid unexpected bills, for years she's been paying over the odds for gas and electricity using prepayment meters. So she thinks this price cut is long overdue.
I don't think it's fair that we should pay more because we've got a prepay meter. It's good they've given a reduction, but over the year it's not really a lot.
The new prepay price cap will benefit around 4 million households. Depending upon where they live and their energy use, they should save around £80 a year. Importantly, they'll also be protected from sudden price rises. But won't a price cut for some mean a price hike for others?
An efficient supplier should be easily able to meet this price cap without having to cross-subsidise from any other area of the market. So if a company comes along and says, I have to raise my other prices because of this, I think that is frankly rubbish.
Here in South London, at this tower block, the vast majority of residents use prepayment meters. And campaigners have long argued that these sorts of households get a raw deal when it comes to their energy. So the question they're asking today is whether an £80 saving goes far enough.
People on prepayment meters are among the most vulnerable, and they should not be paying more than any other customer. In fact, many people think they should be paying less because they're paying in advance.
Oh, Max. Good boy.
The price cap is meant to be temporary, but it will protect Maggie until at least 2020. By then, it's hoped that the energy market will have changed to make it easier for everyone to get a better deal. John Moylan, BBC News.
Children as young as 10 are feeling the pressure to look good in selfies. That's according to a survey for BBC Newsround. It found that more than half of 10 to 12-year-olds they questioned use social media to share selfies, and 3/4 of them said looking good was important. But many also say they don't like their parents putting pictures of them online, as David Silito now reports.
You get likes and you get nice comments. You need to get your good side.
Smile, click, share. For more than half of children aged between 10 and 12, this has become part of everyday life. And 1 in 5 are worrying about how good they look online.
Sometimes people get more likes than you, and you may get a little bit jealous. There is a little bit of pressure. If you post like a really bad picture, people wouldn't like you.
Of course, it's not just the kids. This slightly older birthday family outing was equally being shared online.
I think they do it more than me.
They do it more than you?
Yes, they're always getting their phones out to do selfies.
And it's not just them, it's the family.
You've got kids, haven't you?
Yeah, I've got 2 young, 5 and 3.
Do you post pictures of them?
I do, yes.
They can't say whether they want it or not, can they?
No, but the pictures are for friends and family to see, really, so I have quite a private profile.
Do you post pictures of the children?
No. We're very
careful
about what we do there.
Yes, the selfies become part of everyday life for millions of us, but some children are unhappy with certain pictures, not their own, but the pictures their parents are taking of them.
More than 1 in 4 children have been embarrassed or upset.
When my mum takes pictures of me, she'll do it when I'm not looking, and then won't ask, and then she'll just put it on. Maybe like when they post photos, like they could ask first, because like sometimes, most of the time my mum just posts them. Mum took a picture of me when I was sleeping, so I obviously didn't know until morning. And she said, look how many comments you've got on this photo, and I was just really angry at her. They just like post whatever they can find. They just don't really think about anything. You think about it, but they don't think about it.
Don't let parents have social media.
So, selfie culture has spread fast. However, the etiquette of how we share and who we share is only beginning to catch up. David Silato, BBC News.
A police camera in the United States has caught the moment that a meteor travelling at more than 45,000 miles an hour tore across the sky. People across 4 Midwestern states saw the spectacular display, which turned the sky green in the early hours of the morning. Snow there, snow heading this way as well, apparently, Steph.
Could be, that's right, Sophie. Towards the end of the week and into the weekend, certainly I'll show you that in just a moment. We've got a big mixture of weather across the country today. Good portion of the UK seeing some sunshine, but there's also some pretty heavy showers out there. And there's even a little bit of snow, particularly across Scotland, closer to that area of low pressure. We've had reports of some wet snow around the central belt, certainly across the Campsies then in towards the northeast of Scotland. Windy here and grey across eastern parts of the UK. But further west, we've got that mixture of sunshine and showers. Some of these showers have been pretty heavy for Wales, the southwest of England, with some hail and thunder mixed in, and even a little bit of winteriness there over the Brecon Beacons. But there's plenty of sunshine, though, through the Midlands, just in towards the southeast as well, nudging temperatures up to 10 degrees, but it is quite cool, chilly, grey and damp across the east coast there. Bit of sunshine for Northern Ireland as well, 1 or 2 showers around, but quite a messy picture there for Scotland. And the best of the dry, bright weather across the west, but there's still that snow, certainly over the Grampians, and that wet and windy weather continuing for the Northern Isles. Little change into this evening. The snow continues as well across eastern Scotland, mainly over the higher ground. The showers continue across the southwest, I think becoming more confined towards coastal areas, but it will turn cold under clear skies in the west with a bit of mist and fog, potentially some ice as well. But across eastern areas, we'll see that weather front on the coast starting to work its way westwards, introducing more cloud to the UK. So that means for Wednesday, a lot of cloud around across the UK, outbreaks of rain, generally light and patches. That weather front will be weakening, but don't be surprised to see the odd snowflake in the air across eastern England, certainly across eastern Scotland. The best of any brighter weather will be sheltered western areas. The temperatures here around 7 degrees, but distinctly chilly across eastern areas, and that's because we're starting to pull an easterly wind off the near continent. It'll continue to push that weather front across the UK and keep all these weather systems out at bay in the Atlantic. But that cold day really will be the theme for Thursday. It really will be a cold, grey day, biting easterly wind. Don't be surprised if you see the odd wintry shower across eastern areas, some damp weather too. Look at those temperatures, 2 to 4 Celsius for many. Again, the best of any brighter weather across sheltered western areas. Same picture again on Friday, a lot of grey weather, feeling even colder, temperatures quite widespread. 2s, 3s, maybe 4 Celsius in that biting easterly wind. So towards the end of the week, like I mentioned, that cold, biting easterly wind will continue, and it could bring a few snow showers around, particularly as we head on in towards the weekend. Favoured spots, it's looking at the moment like being east and northeast England and southeast Scotland. But stay tuned to the weather.
Steph, thank you. A reminder now of our main story this lunchtime. The Commons Speaker, John Bercow, is facing criticism from a growing number of Conservative MPs after saying he would prevent President Trump from addressing Parliament. That's all from the BBC News at 1, so it's goodbye from me on BBC One. We now join the BBC's news teams where you are. Bye-bye.